It was so wonderful to have time this month to kick off my annual 95 county tour, which is what I do in Tennessee each year. And I know that my colleagues across the aisle think that they're here starting fresh with the new Congress, but that's not the way the people in Tennessee see this. As I have talked with people in our state, they continue to talk about what has happened this past couple of years with inflation, with crime, with that open border, with the supply chain issues. They're worried about that. They are worried about how that is going to affect them this year. And my colleague from Texas has touched on some of these issues. Now, in Tennessee, as they look at what has transpired over the last couple of years, we talked a lot about a tornado in December that ripped through Dresden, Tennessee, and I went into the Presbyterian church that was demolished on my last visit over there, and I saw the progress that they're making to rebuild that wonderful church. And one of the things they talked about was how inflation and supply chain bottlenecks are really thwarting their efforts to get this sanctuary finished so that they can have their Easter celebration right there in that sanctuary in Waverly, Tennessee. Those individuals know exactly how the people over in Dresden feel, because we had floods that came through Humphreys County, Tennessee, devastating floods. There were 20 Tennesseans that lost their lives when the floods ripped through that town, destroyed that town about a year and a half ago. And the town is trying to rebuild. And my team and I were able to help those folks there in Waverly secure a disaster declaration and the funds that they needed to help get rebuilding. But the same issues, inflation and supply chains, those things that are hurting Dresden are hurting Waverly as they try to rebuild homes and as they try to recover. Now, this president, this administration, and my Democratic colleagues have focused on big spending and little else. And it has really created a minefield for our local leaders, whether they're trying to rebuild or whether they're trying to expand. But those issues, supply chains, inflation, continue to come up. And West Tennessee, where I started my 95 county tour, is experiencing massive growth. Ford Motor Company is coming in there, and they have a big plant, a multi-billion-dollar investment. Sonova is over in that part of the state. There are other companies that are moving their operations to the area, and these communities are set to welcome thousands of jobs, homes, and new businesses, but they're not ready because the existing utility infrastructure cannot support the growth and expansion that is coming into that part of our state. Until recently, most of this West Tennessee area was fields and small rural communities. These local leaders now are seeing growth, and they need to expand their utilities, their water, their sewer, their electric power distribution, their telecom services, and they're having to do it quickly as these major employers ramp up. But something is standing in their way. And again, it is all of this government spending that has driven this inflation and the supply chain crisis that is slowing down what they need. They can't get pipe to build out water and wastewater systems. They can't get telephone poles. If they could find a transformer to buy, they wouldn't be able to afford it because the price has increased by more than 400%, Madam President, 400% since Joe Biden was sworn into office. I know that the Biden administration has an agenda, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to check these items off of their to-do list. They do have an agenda, Madam President. It's all about government control. It is all about government spending. It's not the agenda that the people have. The way people in these communities in Tennessee see it is there is a disregard for how this federal policy, as it comes down, how it affects them and how it makes their future difficult. It should not be this difficult to rebuild a home or to run a sewer line or to finish a new road. Tennesseans know this, and they trust me when I meet with them to bring that message back here to DC, that decisions that are made here make their life at the local level more difficult. Madam President, I ask that the remainder of my remarks be placed separately in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Over the past few years, we have seen proof that until President Biden and his administration secures the southern border, every town is a border town, every state is a border state. And my colleague from Texas spoke so well about this issue and the impact that that open border is having on our communities. Tennesseans are suffering because of the open border agenda, particularly when it comes to the disastrous consequences of the cross-border drug trade. Tennessee law enforcement officials are working overtime to take down the cartel kingpins who have set up shop in our state, just like they have set up shop in so many of our states. But drug overdoses continue to destroy families, they destroy lives and careers, and the Biden administration continues to look the other way. This month, I had the opportunity to see just how bad the situation has gotten right down on that southern border. Now, Senators Hyde-Smith and Britt were kind enough to join me as we went to Eagle Pass, Texas, where we witnessed firsthand the chaos that this administration's open border policies have created. As most of my colleagues know, the situation in Texas became so dire that the Texas officials decided to take matters into their own hands. In 2022, Operation Lone Star helped law enforcement apprehend more than 336,000 illegal immigrants. That's just in Texas. They arrested more than 23,000 criminals, criminal illegal aliens, 23,000 just in Texas. And they seized 354 million lethal doses of fentanyl. 354 million doses. Now, these numbers are appalling. When you hear them stand alone, they are appalling. When you talk to the Border Patrol and you realize this is Texas, this doesn't account for the other states. This doesn't account for what is going on as every state becomes a border state. Every town becomes a border town. And when you hear these numbers, one would think, common sense would tell you, that this chamber should get busy saying, how do we secure that southern border? But that hasn't happened, and the cost of negligence is more crime and more death and more American citizens losing their lives and the cartel making more money. Yes, indeed. The cartels are running that border. You do not cross. Nothing crosses without paying the cartel. Now, we visited several locations in the Del Rio sector that are experiencing significant migrant traffic along the river. At every location, we found clothing, IDs, medication, and other personal items that the migrants dropped as they entered the country. What happened to those individuals is anyone's guess, because, see, many of them don't want to be found out who they really are. Many of them are convicted criminal aliens. Many of them come from countries that they would be sent back. So they create a new identity once they touch U.S. soil. And then they can be here because we have catch and release, because we do not have remain in Mexico, because we do not have what the Border Patrol has been telling us for 30 years they need, a physical barrier and better technology where they cannot have a physical barrier. In Eagle Pass, we were able to witness firsthand two separate migrant groups crossing the river. One of those groups included a pregnant woman and several children. The other included children and an elderly woman who was clearly struggling to keep her footing while she was coming across that river. And with this dangerous situation, with those freezing waters, the Texas National Guard troops could only watch and just hope that no one drowned. Now, that's what we saw in the early morning hours. But what we know is during the night, there were 57 other groups that crossed. A lot of them single adults. We know that the cartels, which are multi-billion-dollar, multinational organizations, they work globally, and they're bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars a week. And, Madam President, they have brought along people from 150 different countries who are going to the cartel to come into the country because they think it's faster to do it that way. Or maybe they want to be one of the gotaways, people we see on surveillance that are known gotaways, or the unknown gotaways, which is what the really bad ones are. They're going completely different areas and crossing to bring in drugs, to bring in sex traffickers, to bring in human traffickers, to put people into modern-day slavery. 57 more known crossings, known, that we did not see. Border agents told us that the day before our tour, that there were 1,000 arrests in the Del Rio sector. Now, Madam President, the day before we were out, it's important to note, there in Eagle Pass, there were 1,000 arrests. The president, on that very same day, was at El Paso. He saw no migrants. He saw a cleaned up community. The visit had been sanitized so that he did not see what they were experiencing in the Del Rio sector and at Eagle Pass. Now, after we had been out with Border Patrol and were watching all of this, we made one more stop, and it was to the Harris Ranch, which is near Uvalde, Texas. And this area has seen significant migrant traffic. It has disrupted their entire community. I met with local officials, mayors, sheriffs, DAs, people that own businesses, farmers, ranchers. And they told us that sometimes people may need an ambulance, but many times they're unavailable to people at Uvalde or in Kinney County because they're too busy responding to migrant emergencies. And the county attorney stated that he has prosecuted 4,000 criminal trespass cases, 4,000. And since August of 2021, he has prosecuted twice the number of people as live in the entire county. Now think about that. Double the number of people in your county where you live. And think about that as cases that are going to come before your local court system. And who pays for that? That's right, you do, the taxpayer. Every penny being spent, every penny is coming out of your pocket. And when you talk about the humanitarian crisis at that border, the loss of life, the abuse, the humanitarian cost is amazing. People who are risking their life because they're buying the lie of the cartels. They're physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually, and drug abused as they make this journey. Now, the Harris Ranch has about 30 miles of fencing around it, but even though they've got that fencing, it doesn't stop the migrants from coming onto the property. The owner of the ranch told us that he regularly gets a call in the middle of the night informing him that a migrant is having an emergency somewhere on his land and has dialed 911. Sometimes these calls come in too late or they don't come in at all, and we've all seen the news reports of these ranchers finding dead bodies on their property. And I will tell you that nothing in these reports is blown out of proportion. It is devastating, it is sad, it is a humanitarian crisis. Many of the migrants that the people at Harris Ranch have discovered got lost, or they were abandoned by the smugglers. Others were dumped there by the cartels. And we know this because the ranchers have seen it play out on their security footage. I would encourage my colleagues to think about this the next time they're in front of the cameras and commenting about how compassionate they think the Biden administration policy is when it comes to open borders. Madam President, it is not compassionate. When you talk to a young woman who for 4 years suffered at the hands of a cartel and sex traffickers, raped over 400 times, beaten with chains, it's not compassionate. When you hear these stories of abuse, when you hear about cartels killing somebody who they think is too weak to make the journey, there is nothing compassionate about it. In December, according to Border Patrol and the Department of Homeland Security, which, by the way, that's this administration's Department of Homeland Security, there were more than 250,000 migrant encounters, which is the highest number of encounters ever recorded at the southern border. Putting that into context, That is more than the population of Knoxville, Tennessee, more than the population of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And Madam President, part of the tragedy is month after month, year after year, this gets worse. It continues to get worse. And we have to remember, these are the numbers that we know. These are not the gotaways that they could see on surveillance camera. They think you've had, in the last year, 1 million gotaways that are running into the country. Those are the known gotaways. We don't have a number on the unknown gotaways. And we have people that want to say this administration's policy is compassionate, and they're bringing in drugs, fentanyl, 16,000 pounds of it, enough to kill 3.3 billion people. They're trafficking women and girls, and we know that because we're hearing their stories. Our human trafficking organizations are rescuing these women and girls. We hear about the gangs, we hear about crime in our communities, and we also hear from the Border Patrol, we can fix this. We can fix it. As I said, they've asked for a barrier. They've asked for better technology. They tell us keep Title 42. They tell us we need to remain in Mexico. They tell us you have to end catch and release in this country. Take away the incentives to come to the country illegally. It is time that we make certain that we secure that southern border. And my hope is that my Democratic colleagues will put down their talking points and that they will pay attention to what is happening, not only in the border communities, but in towns and cities and communities and in families who are experiencing adverse effects because of what is happening with this open border. It is time that we realize the cartels are taking advantage of an open border. They are taking advantage of a weak administration who will not stop them. It is time to secure that southern border. It is time to give the Border Patrol what they need to defend our southern border. It is imperative that we address these issues. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.